Alright, today is the day. I'm going through my entire eyeshadow palette collection and I am ready to declutter some of this. I haven't counted the number of palettes yet, but I will count afterwards, so I'm going to leave the starting number on the screen right here. And let's go ahead and get started on this declutter. I'm gonna go ahead and start in this little corner and let's just dive right into it. I'm just gonna go for it. I don't think you can see this one over here, but this is the What's Up Beauty Dragon Eye palette that came out in 2023. Of course, I'm gonna keep this. This was one of my favorites of last year. Obviously gonna keep Pretty Grunge. This was my #1 palette of 2023. These aren't really laid out in any particular order, but I did grab them in piles from my room, so like they kind of might be grouped by favorites a little bit. Next is the Sigma Beauty and the Beast palette. This was another top palette for me in 2023. I love this one. I'm like kind of avoiding grabbing a Subculture right here. Now, this isn't a palette that I necessarily use, but I like to keep it for the memories. Like this palette caused so much chaos in the beauty world, but I do love this color story. No, I haven't used it in years, so I'm gonna keep this, but I'm probably going to put it in like my makeup memories box. And per the name, that is just makeup that I keep for the memories and for the feeling of it, but I don't necessarily use that makeup on my face. Over here we have the Natasha Denona Glam palette. Of course, I'm going to keep this. This is one of my favorite Natasha palettes. And another obvious one is the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette. I think this was my #3 or 4 palette of last year. This Huda Beauty Wild Chameleon palette. This is just a 9-pan palette. I bought this one myself just because it looked really cool. There was a time when I really loved her 9-pan palettes, but I have not used this since I bought it. I think I maybe did one video with it and then I just haven't touched it since. I do love looking at this color story, but I know that I have so many palettes that have these shades in it already that I do grab for, so I think I'm going to declutter this one. Next is the Juvia's Place Afro Galactic palette. Now I did get this one last year, but I did rank it pretty low in my 2023 palette rankings, and that's just because of the color story. I don't love this color story, but some of these kind of multi-chrome, duochrome shades in here like really do stand out. So I am going to keep it for that reason, but if I find myself not using it at all this year, I'll probably declutter it next time. Moving right along, I do have 2 Anastasia Modern Renaissance palettes. It's so funny seeing these side by side, but this dirty one is the original one that I got in 2016. You can see she is pretty dusty inside. And then I did buy this newer one last year because I did a video kind of comparing both palettes and the formulas and how they wore on the eyes. I'll put that video right up here if you want to check it out and in the description box. So I think what I'm going to do is hold on to this 2016 one in my makeup memories box and then keep this one like in my active eyeshadow palette collection. The Anastasia Amrezy palette. I have held on to this palette for so long and I don't even use it. I have not used this in at least 3 or 4 years. I think I'm finally ready to get rid of it. Like, I honestly forgot about this palette. It was released so long ago. It's pink, it's sparkly, like this is just not my vibe. The colors are cool inside, but I'm going to declutter this one. Down here is my new Natasha Denona Mini My Dream palette. I literally just got this. I have one video up with it, and I just think it's the cutest little thing. This is my only Natasha Denona Mini palette, so of course I'm gonna keep it. Again, I just got it, and I do want to do some more videos with it. And then we have the original My Dream Midi palette. This was my favorite palette of 2022. Of course, I'm keeping it. Next is the ColourPop Going Coconuts palette. People always tell me this, but I think my shades might be arranged in the wrong way because I have dropped this palette before and I always have to like stick them back in. I do think this is a gorgeous palette. It leans a little bit more neutral, warm, and while I don't really use this palette a lot, I like to keep it because, you know, YouTube is my full-time job and this is a really good palette to like compare palettes to or just compare formulas. So this one I do keep for videos. I have this one Lethal Cosmetics palette. I did a sponsorship with them probably 3 years ago where I got to create my own little custom palette. So I created this palette. It's a fun little color story of a bunch of their singles, but honestly, I don't use this palette. The only reason why I have kept it is because it's the only Lethal shadows that I own, and their shadows really are great. I should try more from the brand, honestly. I know I haven't used this palette in a very long time, so I'm going to declutter it. Next, we have the Sigma Alice in Wonderland palette. This one came out 2022, right? I do think this one is really fun and different for Sigma. I want to say it's like their most colorful palette. I think it's a really cool color story. I like how they do their Disney collabs, so I am going to keep this this one. Next is the Sigma Dream palette that was in collaboration with Beauty Bird. Now this one came out, I want to say over 5 years ago at this point, but look at this color story. It is so gorgeous. So many warm neutrals up here. You got fun pops of colors. Again, I haven't used this palette in a really long time, but I just love looking at it and being inspired by this color story. So I'm going to continue hanging on to this one. Grabbing this one down here because I'm like sitting on it. Natasha Denona Yucca. I literally just posted a video with this palette the other day, so of course I'm gonna keep it. Such a fun and unique color story. I have a bunch of these Alter Ego palettes kind of hanging out right here. In case you don't know about Alter Ego, they kind of dupe high-end palettes and make like the same exact color stories, but they just make it like a more affordable option. I'll kind of show you one. Like this is the Sahara palette. So it looks like that. And this is a dupe of the Natasha Denona Biba. And I actually dropped my Biba palette, so I don't have that black shade anymore. I tend to drop my palettes a lot. Yeah, you can see they're dupes for each other. And I normally do a video with Alter Ego when they launch a new palette, which is why I have all these. I think that's all the dupes I'm finding. So we got Harmony. That's a dupe for Natasha Retro. I have Artemis, which is a dupe for Natasha Metropolis. Luster, which is a dupe of the singular Pat McGrath palette I have. It's the Mothership Divine Rose 7. We have Midsummer, which is a dupe of Anastasia Nouveau. Aurora, which is a dupe of Natasha Denona Sunrise. It's like a quiz for me. Like I'm trying to remember what the dupes are. We have a Canyon, which is a dupe of Bronze. Blooms, which is a dupe of Love. Goddess, which dupes the Natasha Denona Gold palette. And then we have a Shadow Kiss, which is a dupe of Natasha Glam. Okay, I have sat here and stared at the palettes. I am gonna keep them because eyeshadow is also my job. And I think I'll just kind of put them in a different area of my makeup room, like kind of keep them in one of my little cabinets, and I'll just know that they're there for filming purposes. Let's do this kind of whole section. Again, down here is the Biba palette. I'm gonna keep it, of course. I also have the Anastasia Soft Glam palette. Now this is the old palette from 2016. I'm gonna keep it. I honestly don't think I'll ever declutter this palette. The good old Tati Beauty Textured Neutrals, another palette that I keep because of the memories, and those glitters are just so stunning. Ooh, okay, I have two of the Natasha Denona Glam Face palettes. These ones came out 2 years ago, I think. And honestly, I'm just not really one to grab for a face palette, but I do think they're super pretty and I love the tones in here. Of course, they're just neutrals. I think I can get rid of the deep one. If I were to reach for an eye and face palette, I would definitely grab this one because these tones are just better for my lighter skin tone. So I am gonna declutter the deep one. Guys, look at me decluttering Natasha Denona. Crazy. Okay, next let's do the Natasha Denona Love palette. Here's my problem. I do my declutters in January. Valentine's Day is February. When that is when I am most likely to use this palette. It's literally called the Love palette. I'm gonna use it in February. Let me guys know if you want me to use this for like a little Valentine's Day look. I totally will. Holding on to it. We have the Anastasia Jackie Aina palette. I loved this palette so much. I will say this every time, but this palette did not get enough love. I'm holding on to this forever. We have the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. Whenever I look at this color story, I just feel so inspired and I want to use it so bad. Like I want to put all of these gold shades on my lid. And this is kind of the fun part about decluttering, is that it's like forcing me to open up every single palette and look at these color stories again. And I'm like, ooh, I want to do this. I want to do this. So I'm gonna keep it. It inspires me. Next is the Anastasia Prism palette. Honestly, sitting here looking at this color story right now, I'm like, this is kind of ugly. Yeah, I am just not feeling this color story. Again, it's an old palette. I'm not gonna use it. I don't really like looking at it, so I'm gonna declutter it. Then we have the Anastasia Sultry palette. I will keep this one. I did do a video with it when she launched her kind of 9-pan version of this, and I love this color story. I think it's such a gorgeous palette, and this one should have got more love as well. Next, we have the Natasha Denona Triochrome palette. I think I'm gonna declutter this one. I just don't like this color story, and like these are the only like really 3 cool shades in the palette. I really don't feel like inspired when I look at this palette, and like it's just mostly matte as well. I don't know. I don't think I need this one, so I'm gonna declutter it. Over here, we have the Huda Beauty new nude palette. I think this was my first like big Huda Beauty palette. I would honestly never use this palette now. I totally forgot there was two like glittery shades in here. And now she does like the cream shades in her palette. Like, why don't we just make like a normal palette, Huda, like with all powders? We don't need these fancy things. Oh, and this one like really gross concealer shade. Do you see how nasty that is? That's gross. I think I'm gonna declutter this palette. I know it's just so old. I don't really think I would use these colors, and I know I have these colors and better palettes in my collection, so I'm going to declutter it. Over here, we have the Natasha Denona Safari palette. Now, this was one I almost decluttered last year, but I didn't. And I think I'm ready to declutter it now. This is an all matte Natasha palette, and I honestly found these shades really hard to work with, but this is an old palette. I think her formula has definitely improved. And again, I have shadows that are better quality than this in my collection if I want these types of shadows, so I'm gonna declutter another Natasha Denona. Ooh, the Jaclyn Hill palette volume 2. This is honestly a really fun and bright palette. I definitely have pulled it out in like the spring and summer. Like, my eye is just so drawn to like these 6 shades right here. And I know that everyone has their own feelings on Jaclyn, but like, this is a palette that I bought with my own money. I like the color story. I'm gonna keep it. While we're here, let's talk about the original Jaclyn Hill palette. Now, this was my second version of the palette. I did have like the first one that came out, and that one lives in my Makeup Memories box. It's like already in there. And I think I'm just gonna move this one into the Makeup Memories box as well. This was my favorite palette when it came out, whatever year that was. I have done 30 plus tutorials with this palette. Like, this palette kind of helped me grow my YouTube channel. So this one is the color story and everything is very special, and just like, you know, that timing. So this one's gonna go in my Makeup Memories box. Okay, I had to move back down here, but we have the Patrick Ta Major Dimensions 3 palette. This is my only Patrick Ta palette, and I am obsessed with it right now. It is one of my top favorites. Of course I'm keeping it. And then I have this little Moondust palette that came out this last holiday, and I am so happy that I bought this. I have been actually using this so much for like my everyday eyeshadow, and I actually want to do a video kind of my everyday makeup look pretty soon, and I've been loving this with the Patrick Ta palette. Like, these are my two go-tos right now. Next, I have this one Lottie London palette. This one is really new to me. I did film a short with it. I'm not sure if that's up already, but I am gonna hang on to this. Next, we have the Sigma and Stephanie Lang palette. Now, I normally like to hold on to collab palettes just because I think they're really special. I think it's so cool when someone gets to collab with a makeup brand. I love the size of this, but I never use this, and I never like think about this palette. I never really want to use it. And this palette is a few years old at this point, so I'm gonna declutter it. Give Beauty eyeshadow quad. This was ranked really low in my 2023 palette ranking just because of the formula. I love the shades in this, and I did post a video with this palette where I showed you how to do 3 looks with it, but I have other quads that I like in my collection, so I am gonna declutter this one. Next, this is a 7-pan version of the Sigma Ambiance palette. I think I'm more likely to use the full Ambiance palette, which is back there in my collection, but it just came out last year. It's still pretty new. I'll hold on to it for now, but I think by the next declutter, if I haven't used it, I'll probably declutter it then. Next is the ColourPop That's Taupe palette. This is just another classic ColourPop palette. Kind of like the Going Coconuts palette, I am gonna hold on to this one. Ooh, and then I have the ColourPop Sweet Talk palette. Now, when I was laying out all these palettes, I saw this one and I was like, I totally forgot I have this. Like, I thought I decluttered it, and that tells me I probably don't really need it. So I'm gonna declutter this one. Next is the Sigma and Diana Saldana palette that came out last year. I think this is a really pretty kind of soft, like almost bridal palette. I am gonna hang on to it. Next is the Natasha Denona Pastel palette. Now, I do use this palette a little bit every year because once spring rolls around, I wanna use pastel shadows, and these are the ones that I grab for. I will hang on to this. Next, we have the Retro palette. I'm definitely gonna hang on to this one, and I've kind of been thinking about this palette recently. Like, I want to use it again, so I will keep it. We have the Sunrise palette. I don't really use a lot of shades like this anymore, like those super warm kind of berry tones. Like, you know, in 2016, 2017, this palette would have been amazing, but I just really don't have like a desire to use this palette. So I think I'm going to declutter another Natasha Denona palette. We have the bronze palette. Now I do really like this color story. Like if I want to do a bronzy look, I know I'm going to get one of those shimmers in this palette. It is so pretty. So I'm going to keep it. Over here we have the gold palette. Now this is another like older palette from her, but I love like these two shades right here. Actually, do those look like the ones in Yucca now that I'm thinking about it? I feel like some people did videos comparing these when Yucca came out, right? But looking at these two palettes, I'm way more inspired by Yucca. But like this has some gorgeous just like neutrals in it. I'm gonna hang on to it. Then we have the Natasha Xenon palette. I am going to keep this one because it is pretty new in my collection. And I know if I want to do a silver or gray look, I'm using this palette. And then we have Retro Glam, another palette that I really like from her because it's kind of another unique color story. This is another palette that I can see myself grabbing for in the spring with these kind of muted pastel shades. So pretty. Next, I have the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette. I definitely do like this color story and how it kind of has like a softer vibe to it, so I will keep it. I also know I will definitely keep the Naughty Nude. Like I was saying earlier about her putting those weird shades in her palette. Ugh, I hate this one. But I do love this kind of more neutral, warm palette. And then we have Empowered. And I loved this palette when it came out. Like all of these shades right here, like pack such a big punch on your eyes. I'm gonna keep it. And then back here we have Mercury Retrograde. So again, I'm sitting here looking at this palette and I just like, I don't love it that much. Again, we have two kind of glittery shades up there. I think I would just rather use the Rose Quartz palette. Let me see. I always get these two palettes like confused in my mind, but like looking at both of these, I'm way more likely to use this palette. So I think I'm gonna declutter Mercury Retrograde. Let's go in here. This is the Urban Decay Wild Greens palette. I think this packaging is so cool and unique, but I'm also just a sucker for an eyeball. I think this is a cool palette for Urban Decay, and I like this color story, but I don't really love Urban Decay's formula, so I think I can declutter this. I have two more of those Sigma 7pan palettes. We have Warm Neutrals and Corte Rosa. I am going to hang on to both of these, just like I did with the Ambiance. And then I'm going to have a lot of these Sigma 9pan palettes kind of scattered throughout, but I have Rosy and Hazy. I don't think I really like the color story of Hazy. I found that these shades just look kind of ashy on me, so I am going to declutter this one. And then the Rosy palette is okay. This is another palette I can see myself, again, using in February. But I think I'll hold on to it for now. I'm trying to make some room for these quads because I want to just talk about all of my quads really quick, and I'm going to grab my other Sigma ones. Okay, this is 13 eyeshadow quads, and I don't think I need all of these. I know for sure I'm going to keep Sigma Peach Pie. This is like my favorite one out of all of them, and then I'll also keep this ColourPop one because these are just kind of like the perfect quads in my opinion. Now, this deeper, really, really warm ColourPop one, I am going to declutter. Again, I just don't really use these kind of shades anymore, and I would much rather have a quad that has like some shimmers in it. I don't really like when they're all matte. So I think because of that, I'll also declutter these two. I'm definitely going to keep Tiramisu and Creme Brulee. I love these color stories. I think Bonbon is like my least favorite out of the three, but these aren't really new in my collection, so I am going to keep them. Okay, then we have these three ColourPop ones here. Okay, I'm going to declutter these three. I'd rather just use the Sigma ones than these ones. Ooh, so earlier I was talking about those Huda Beauty like 9pan nude palettes. I loved these when they came out, but they came out a while ago at this point. I honestly thought I decluttered one of these. I might have held on to it. Like, they're all pretty neutral palettes. I think I can get rid of them. All three of them. Like, I just don't need these anymore. And I think I'd much rather use like her bigger palettes than these ones, but I loved these when they came out. And then the Huda Beauty Cool Matte Obsessions. Now, I did get this palette last year, but I wasn't very impressed by it, so I think I am going to declutter it. We got another of the Sigma little 7pan palettes. This one is Enchanted. Now, honestly, Enchanted is probably one of my least favorite Sigma palettes. And I think that's really funny because I know that Kelly Gooch loves that palette. So because I just don't really like this color story, I am going to declutter this one. But I held on to the other ones because I do like those color stories. Ooh, the Haus Labs Little Eye Library palettes. I think these were ranked like second to lowest in my eyeshadow ranking. So I think I am going to do what I said I was going to do in that video and try to like maybe depot these shimmery shades that I like, but then toss the rest of them because they're just so bad. So disappointing. Then we have the Urban Decay Born to Run palette. Now, this is another palette that I keep for you guys and like for YouTube, because if this wasn't my job, I don't think I would keep this palette. And I do tend to use it when I do my 12 days of tutorials in December. Or is it time to retire it? I don't know. Like, I feel like I can get rid of it, but do you guys feel like I can? I think I am. I'm gonna declutter it. Let's go through these Sigma 9 pan palettes. So my least favorite one out of these is definitely Electric Pink. I just don't love this color story. It's not shades that I really like to wear, so I will declutter it. But then all the other ones I do like. Like, there's something I enjoy about all of these, so I'm gonna keep the rest. Ooh, ColourPop Nude Mood. I kind of forgot that I had this one too. I definitely thought I decluttered it. I'm gonna declutter it. I just don't really care about this one anymore. Oh, I missed a couple Alter Ego palettes. Whoops. Okay, this one is a dupe of Mercury Retrograde, right? That I just decluttered? No. Okay, it's a dupe of Rose Quartz. I was looking at this color story and I was like, I kind of hate this. But when I look at the Huda Beauty one, like, the layout just makes so much more sense to me. I'm gonna declutter this one. And then we have Mirage, which is a dupe of Huda Empowered. I am gonna keep this one. And then we got Sakura, which is a dupe of Natasha Denona Retro Glam. I am gonna keep this one too. And I do really love how they did this layout compared to the Natasha Denona one. We're finally getting towards like the 4th quadrant here, and I think these will be good ones. We gotta talk about the Urban Decay Naked palettes. Now, I only have Heat and Honey, and I have not used these palettes. Again, this is another one that I'm hanging on to because of YouTube. Like, I just don't really care about them, so I think I will declutter them. These are like the last 2 Naked palettes I have. I wish I still had my original Naked one, but I don't. I am going to keep all of these Odin's Eye palette because they all came into my collection like last year or the year before. They're still pretty new. I'll quickly go through them. This is the Snow Dream palette. This one is Hey Reindeer. This one is my least favorite though out of the Odin's Eye palettes that I have. Next we have Stone and Rock. I love this color story. And then Jewels and Gem. Another really pretty kind of neutral palette, but this still has like some color to it. We have the Christmas Eve palette. Now, I actually haven't done a video with this palette. I never got around to it this last December. So maybe next December I'll do a video with it. And then we have the Merry Christmas palette. I love the color story of this palette. And then we have the 2 Angelica palettes for Halloween. This one is Little Ghost, and next is Trick or Treat, and I love this color story for Halloween. We have the Sigma Warm Neutrals palette. Now, honestly, this is another color story I just don't really love from Sigma. I just don't really think I'm a big fan of these kind of like rosy pinky shades on myself. So I am going to declutter this one. And then over here is the ColourPop of Course palette. I like this color story. I love the kind of cool toned taupey vibe it has, so I'm going to keep it. Over here is the Urban Decay Little Naked Sin palette. Now, I think this is the like most perfect little beginner palette. I even did a whole video about that, so I'm going to keep this one. Ooh. Then we have the Viseart Coyish Etondu palette that I impulse bought last year. I'm gonna declutter it just because of these shades are not like duochrome and super shimmery like they claimed. I do still want to try like another Viseart palette. I just need to find a color story that I really like. So I am gonna declutter this one. Guys, we are almost at the end here. I have the Mel Cosmetics Dark Matter palette. Now, I hate the tiny pans in this palette, but I just got this last year, so I'm gonna keep it. And I have the Rust palette, again from Melt. I love this color story with these kind of like grungy mustardy shades. I'm gonna keep it. And then Gemini 2, I am gonna keep this one. I am a Gemini. I know I just said I don't really like these rosy pinky tones, but I feel like they just did it right with this palette. And I also love these greens. I love the 2 sides of it, you know? We have the Sigma On Nook palette. I am gonna hang on to this one. Super pretty color story. You know that On loves these colors. Next is the Melt Cosmetics Amor y Mariposas palette. Now, I bought this 2 years ago, I think. And I remember not really loving the formula of the shadows. I know I didn't use it at all last year. I like the butterflies, but it's like, I like butterflies, you know? I think I can declutter this one. Like, it's a really pretty color story, but I just don't see myself really using it. Next, I have the What's Up Beauty Geodes palette. I love the shimmers in this palette, but I don't really love the mattes in here. I just don't think the mattes really go with those shimmers. I wanted to grab the Dragon's Eye palette that I am keeping from them. And it's like that green could kind of look like that. You know what I mean? I don't think I need both of these, so I think I'm gonna declutter geodes. And then we have the Desert Monsoon palette. I honestly don't really like this color story either. It's just kind of hard for me to put colors together where it's like, you know, you have your more neutral browns, but then you have all these pops of colors, but like no mattes to pair those colors with. Does that make sense? So I'm gonna declutter this one. I have the ColourPop Stone Cold Fox palette. This is such a classic cool tone palette. Of course, I'm gonna keep it. Ooh, and then we have the Smoke and Roses palette. I don't know if I've actually used this one on camera. I think I maybe have one video with it, but this is another good like pinky Valentine's Day palette. I should do a video with this soon. Then I have the ColourPop Your Golden palette. I really like pulling out this palette in the summer. I just get summer vibes from it, so I'm gonna keep it. And then I also already know I'm gonna keep Bare Necessities. Out of all the big ColourPop palettes I have, this one is my favorite. Like, this is the perfect neutral palette in my opinion. Over here, I have the Sigma Ambiance palette. This is a palette I grab for if I know I want a really warm brown look. It is super pretty, so I'm gonna keep it. And then I have the Sigma and Cinderella palette. I love this palette when it came out. I'm gonna keep it. And then the Sigma Enchanted palette. Now, I did say this is one of my least favorite color stories from them. I think I'm ready to get rid of this one, so I'm gonna declutter it. And then I have my one Pat McGrath palette that I talked about earlier. This is the Mothership Divine Rose 7. I will keep this one. We have the Michaela and Glamlight. This is the first collection. I like these colors. These are the only Glamlight palettes that I have, and I really do like their formula, so I am gonna keep this one. And then I will keep the part 2 as well. I love all of these green shades in the palette. Like, if I know I want to do a green look, I can easily grab for this one. I have the Sigma Corte Rosa. This is another palette that I like to grab for in the spring and summer, so I'm gonna keep it. I always get just like so excited for spring eyeshadows, and speaking of that, the Nouveau palette by Anastasia. This is just another spring palette to me. I think it's so pretty. Ooh, and then we have Fall Romance that I did not love when it came out last year. Like, do I hold on to it because it's new, even though I'm not gonna use this? I'm gonna declutter it. And that's crazy for me to declutter a palette that I just got like a couple months ago, but I will find a good home for this, don't worry. And then we have the Rose Metals palette. I love using this palette in the fall. It's just like fall grungy vibes to me, so I am gonna keep it. Ooh, this Jaclyn Hill Divine Neutrals. This palette really didn't get much hype when it launched, and I was kind of surprised, but I don't think I'm gonna use it. I'm gonna declutter this one. Then like some girl collabed with Sigma and like made this palette. I guess it's really pretty. Just kidding, it's my palette. Of course I'm gonna keep it. This is actually my untouched one. Like, I literally have the insert still in here. This one is literally to live on my bookshelf. She's cute, she's new, she's perfect. Keeping it, obviously. Next is the Juvia's Place Culture palette. I don't know, this is another palette I kind of like to pair with the Michaela ones if I want to do a colorful look. It's a good pairing palette in my opinion, just because there are so many different colors in here. You got green, pinks, blues, and purples. Like, there's a lot happening, but I'm gonna keep it. Last two palettes, we have a Sigma New Mod. Oh, this is another beautiful one from them. I'm gonna keep it. And then last is the Sigma Untamed palette. Now, this is another palette that I just don't really love the color story of. I think I almost decluttered it last year. I didn't end up doing that, but I think I'm ready to get rid of it now, so we're gonna end this with a declutter. Here's what the mess looks like behind me. A trail of palettes that I am keeping. This little trail is decluttering, and those over there are going in the Makeup Memories box. I feel like that's a really solid amount to declutter. I'm really proud of myself for finally decluttering some Natasha, some Huda, some Sigma. Like, a lot of these palettes I've held on to for a while, but I just don't need them anymore. And don't worry, I'm gonna find my best to find a new home for these palettes. They are not going in the trash. Thank you so much for watching my declutter, and I will see you guys in the next video.